He laughed at his secretary's plain dress, but the millionaire froze when she arrived like a goddess. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew exactly what he was going to say before he even opened his mouth. Camilla Brown adjusted the silk scarf around her neck with practiced elegance, her fingers moving with the same precision she applied to everything in her professional life. At 26, she had mastered the art of being indispensable while remaining strategically invisible, a skill that had served her well in the cutthroat world of Walker Enterprises. The executive floor of the Manhattan skyscraper buzzed with its usual morning energy. Camilla's mahogany desk sat positioned like a fortress outside Richard Walker's corner office, every document perfectly aligned, every call screened with diplomatic efficiency. She wore a tailored navy dress that complemented her warm brown skin, her natural hair styled in an elegant low bun that spoke of quiet sophistication rather than workplace conformity. "Miss Brown," Richard's voice cut through the ambient office noise like a blade through silk. She looked up from her computer screen, meeting his steel-grey eyes with calm professionalism. Richard Walker stood 6'2" in his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, his dark hair slightly tousled from running his hands through it during his morning conference calls. At 37, he commanded every room he entered with a presence that made seasoned CEOs nervous and board members defer to his every word. "Yes, Mr. Walker." He gestured toward the stack of contracts on her desk. "The Morrison deal. I need those revisions before the 11 o'clock. Already completed and on your desk, sir." Camilla's voice carried a subtle warmth that somehow managed to remain entirely professional. "I also took the liberty of cross-referencing the liability clauses with our previous international agreements. You'll find my notes in the margins?" Richard paused, his expression flickering with something that might have been surprise. In the 18 months since Camilla had become his executive assistant, she had never once failed to anticipate his needs. Yet he seemed perpetually caught off guard by her competence, as if he expected less from the poised woman who managed his impossible schedule with grace. "Right." He turned toward his office, then stopped. "And Miss Brown? The charity gala tonight. I'll need you there to coordinate with the event planners. Something always goes wrong at these functions." Camilla's fingers stilled on her keyboard. She had attended dozens of corporate events as Richard's assistant, always remaining in the background, ensuring everything ran smoothly while he charmed investors and competitors alike. But tonight felt different. The Riverside Children's Foundation Gala was Richard's pet project, the one event each year where his carefully constructed corporate persona showed cracks of genuine emotion. "Of course, Mr. Walker. Should I arrange for the usual car service? We'll go together. I have calls to make on the way." He paused in his doorway, his gaze sweeping over her with the same calculating assessment he gave quarterly reports. "And Miss Brown? This isn't some company picnic. The dress code is—" He gestured vaguely at her outfit. "More." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with an implication that made Camilla's spine straighten almost imperceptibly. She had grown accustomed to Richard's brusque communication style, his tendency to reduce complex thoughts to terse commands, but something in his tone tonight carried a different edge. "I understand completely, Mr. Walker." Her response was measured, controlled, giving away nothing of the spark that flickered behind her dark eyes. "Will there be anything else?" "No, that's all." As his office door closed with a soft click, Camilla returned her attention to her computer screen, but her mind wasn't on the spreadsheet full of quarterly projections. Instead, she found herself thinking about the black dress hanging in her apartment closet, the one she had bought on impulse 6 months ago and never had occasion to wear, the one that transformed her from Richard Walker's efficient assistant into someone else entirely. The morning flew by in its usual controlled chaos. Camilla fielded calls from Tokyo, rescheduled a meeting with the mayor's office, and somehow managed to secure a table for Richard's lunch meeting at a restaurant that had been booked solid for months. She moved through each task with the same quiet efficiency that had made her indispensable to one of New York's most demanding executives. But as the afternoon wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would be different. There was an energy in the air, a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or merger negotiations. At 5:30, as the office began to empty, Richard emerged from his office carrying his briefcase and wearing the distracted expression that usually meant he was solving 3 problems at once in his head. "The car will be here at 7, he said without looking up from his phone. "Don't be late." "I'm never late, Mr. Walker." For the first time that day, Richard actually looked at her, really looked at her. His grey eyes travelled from her face to the elegant curve of her neck, lingering for just a moment longer than strictly professional. When his gaze met hers again, there was something there she had never seen before, something that made her pulse quicken despite her better judgment. "No," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "You're not." As he walked toward the elevator, Camilla began shutting down her computer and organizing her desk for tomorrow. But her hands moved automatically while her mind wandered to the evening ahead. She thought about the black dress, about the way it made her feel when she had tried it on in the boutique changing room. She thought about Richard's words, about the challenge hidden in his casual dismissal of her usual style. Most of all, she thought about the look in his eyes just moments ago, the first time she had ever seen Richard Walker truly see her as more than just his exceptionally competent assistant. Tonight, she decided, might be the night to remind him that still waters run deep, and sometimes the most dangerous currents are the ones you never see coming. The black dress had been waiting for this moment. Camilla stood before her full-length mirror in her Upper West Side apartment, studying her reflection with the same analytical precision she brought to quarterly reports. The silk fabric flowed like liquid obsidian against her warm brown skin, the cut so perfect it seemed designed specifically for her curves. She had chosen pearl earrings that caught the light when she moved, and her natural hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, a striking contrast to the professional updo Richard had grown accustomed to seeing. Her phone buzzed against the marble countertop. "Car arriving in 10 minutes. RWW. Even his text messages were commanding. Camilla applied a final touch of lipstick, a deep burgundy that made her full lips look even more inviting, and slipped into her heels. As she gathered her evening clutch, she caught sight of herself once more in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her was someone Richard Walker had never met. Someone confident, radiant, and utterly magnetic. Someone who refused to be invisible. The elevator descended 30 floors to the lobby, where she could see Richard's black Mercedes waiting through the glass doors. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her breathing remained steady. She had learned long ago that confidence was a choice, not a feeling. The doorman, Aurelius, who had worked the building for 15 years, actually did a double take as she approached. "Miss Brown, my goodness, you look absolutely stunning tonight." "Thank you, Aurelius." Her smile was genuine, warm. "Have a wonderful evening." The Mercedes rear door opened as she approached, and she slid inside with practiced grace. Richard was already seated, scrolling through emails on his phone, his profile sharp against the city lights streaming through the window. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean build, his dark hair styled with subtle precision. "Traffic on 5th is—" He looked up and the words died in his throat. For a moment that stretched like eternity. Richard Walker, the man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, simply stared. His steel-grey eyes traveled slowly from her face to the elegant curve of her collarbone, to the way the dress hugged her figure, before flowing into sophisticated lines. When his gaze returned to meet hers, something had fundamentally shifted in the space between them. "Good evening, Mr. Walker." Her voice carried the same professional warmth as always, but underneath lay a new current of quiet confidence. "Camilla." Her name on his lips sounded different somehow, richer. You look different." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture that sent her waves cascading over one shoulder. Incredible. The word escaped before he could stop it, raw and honest in a way that made both of them pause. The driver pulled into traffic, but neither of them noticed the city blurring past the windows. Richard had closed his phone entirely, something Camilla had never seen him do during a car ride. His attention was completely, utterly focused on her. "I have to ask," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Have you always what? Been this beautiful?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implication. Camilla met his gaze steadily, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Beauty is subjective, Mr. Walker. Perhaps the question is whether you've always been this observant." It was a gentle challenge, wrapped in silk and delivered with devastating precision. Richard felt something in his chest tighten, a sensation he couldn't quite identify. Admiration? Desire? The uncomfortable realization that he had been blind to something extraordinary right in front of him? "You're saying I haven't been paying attention." "I'm saying you've been very busy." Her tone remained diplomatic, but there was steel underneath the velvet. Important men often are. The car turned onto Fifth Avenue, passing the glittering storefronts and elegant restaurants that made up Richard's usual territory. But tonight, the familiar landscape felt different. Everything felt different with Camilla sitting beside him, her presence filling the space with an energy he had never experienced. "Tell me something," Richard said, shifting slightly to face her more directly. "What do you do when you're not managing my impossible schedule?" The question surprised her. In 18 months, he had never asked about her life outside the office. She considered her response carefully. "I read. I cook. Actually cook, not just order takeout. I visit art galleries on Sunday mornings when they're quiet." She paused, studying his face. "I have a life, Mr. Walker. It just happens to exist outside the walls of Walker Enterprises. And what do you think about when you're in those galleries or cooking dinner or reading?" The Mercedes slowed as they approached the Plaza Hotel, where the charity gala was being held. Camilla could see photographers and elegantly dressed couples making their way up the red-carpeted steps, but Richard made no move to get out. Instead, he waited for her answer, as if it were the most important thing in the world. "I think about possibility," she said quietly, "about the difference between what people show the world and who they really are underneath." Their eyes met and held, and in that moment, Camilla saw something crack in Richard's carefully constructed armor. A glimpse of the man behind the corporate persona, someone who might be just as complex and guarded as she was. The car door opened, and the sounds of the city rushed in along with camera flashes and the murmur of the waiting crowd, but neither of them moved immediately. "Camilla," Richard said, his voice so quiet only she could hear it. "Yes? Thank you. For what?" He studied her face in the glow of the hotel lights, searching for words that seemed just beyond his reach. "For reminding me that I still have the capacity to be surprised." As they stepped out of the Mercedes together, Richard instinctively placed his hand on the small of her back, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The touch sent electricity racing through Camilla's nervous system, but she maintained her composure as they walked up the red carpet. The photographers immediately began snapping pictures, but their attention was divided. While Richard Walker always drew media interest, tonight all eyes were on the stunning woman beside him. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why had New York's most eligible bachelor never been seen with her before? As they reached the hotel entrance, Richard leaned close to her ear. His breath was warm against her skin as he whispered, "Are you ready for this?" Camilla turned her head slightly, their faces inches apart, and smiled with devastating confidence. "Mr. Walker, I've been ready for this my entire life." And as they walked through the doors together into the glittering ballroom beyond, Richard realized that everything he thought he knew about his unassuming assistant had just been turned completely upside down. The plaza's grand ballroom fell silent. It wasn't an obvious silence. The orchestra continued playing Vivaldi, champagne glasses still clinked, and conversations carried on in hushed, elegant tones. But there was a shift in the atmosphere, a collective intake of breath as every head in the room turned toward the entrance, where Richard Walker stood beside a woman who seemed to have materialized from pure starlight. Camilla felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, but her expression remained serene as she took in the opulent ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, while arrangements of white orchids and roses created islands of perfection throughout the space. The city's elite mingled in their finest attire, but tonight she belonged among them, not as Richard's assistant but as herself. Mr. Walker, Donovan Ashworth, chairman of the Children's Foundation Board, approached with his characteristic politician's smile. His gaze flickered appreciatively to Camilla before settling on Richard with obvious curiosity. "Wonderful turnout tonight. And who is this enchanting companion?" Richard's hand pressed slightly firmer against Camilla's back, a subtle claim that sent warmth spiraling through her body. "Donovan, I'd like you to meet Camilla Brown." "Camilla, Donovan Ashworth, Miss Brown." Donovan took her offered hand, his eyes lingering on her face with obvious admiration. "Have we met before? You seem familiar." "I don't believe so," Camilla replied with a smile that revealed nothing and everything at once. "Though I'm certain I would have remembered." As Donovan moved on, visibly charmed, Richard leaned closer to her ear. The scent of his cologne, cedar, and something mysteriously masculine made her pulse quicken. "You're enjoying this," he murmured, his breath tickling her skin. "Should I not be?" She turned her head slightly, bringing their faces dangerously close. "It's a beautiful evening." "That's not what I meant." Before she could respond, Another wave of introductions began. Richard guided her through the crowd with practiced ease, his hand never leaving the small of her back. But Camilla noticed something she had never seen in 18 months of working for him: uncertainty. The great Richard Walker, who commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors, seemed almost protective of her, as if he wasn't entirely sure how to navigate this new dynamic between them. "Richard, darling," a sultry voice cut through their conversation with jewelry mogul Cordelia Fairmont. They turned to see Anastasia Belmont approaching, her platinum hair swept into an elaborate updo, her silver gown designed to catch every eye in the room. Richard's ex-fiancée moved with the predatory grace of someone accustomed to being the most beautiful woman in any room, until tonight. "Anastasia." Richard's voice was carefully neutral, but Camilla felt the subtle tension in his posture. Anastasia's ice-blue eyes swept over Camilla with the thoroughness of an appraiser evaluating a piece of art. There was a moment of calculation, then surprise, then something that might have been genuine intrigue. "And you must be Richard's mystery woman," Anastasia said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Anastasia Belmont." "Camilla Brown." Her handshake was firm, confident. "It's nice to meet you." "Brown." Anastasia's head tilted thoughtfully. "Why does that name sound familiar?" Richard stepped slightly closer to Camilla, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by either woman. "Camilla works at Walker Enterprises." "Ah." Understanding dawned in Anastasia's expression, followed by something that looked remarkably like respect. "The executive assistant everyone raves about. Lucinda Morrison told me you saved her merger by catching a clause her own lawyers missed." "I just pay attention to details," Camilla replied modestly. "Don't let her undersell herself," Richard said, his voice carrying a note of pride that surprised even him. "Camilla has one of the sharpest minds I've ever encountered." Anastasia's eyebrows rose slightly at the warmth in his tone. After 3 years of dating Richard Walker, she knew him well enough to recognize when he was genuinely impressed by someone, and she had never, ever heard him speak about any woman the way he had just spoken about his assistant. "How fascinating," Anastasia murmured, her gaze moving between them with newfound interest. "Well, Richard, you certainly know how to keep surprises." As she glided away, Richard and Camilla were left alone for the first time since entering the ballroom. The orchestra had transitioned to a slower piece, and couples were beginning to move toward the dance floor. "She seems nice," Camilla said diplomatically. "She's calculating." Richard's response was immediate. "Anastasia always has an angle." "And what angle might that be?" He turned to face her fully, his grey eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Figuring out why I'm looking at you the way I am." The honesty in his voice sent heat flooding through her veins. Around them, the gala continued its elegant choreography, but Camilla felt as if they were standing in their own private bubble, separate from the rest of the world. "And how are you looking at me, Mr. Walker?" "Like a man who's just realized he's been sleepwalking for 18 months. His voice was low, rough with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "Like someone who's finally waking up." The music swelled, and without breaking eye contact, Richard extended his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request, it was a need, raw and honest, wrapped in the form of an invitation. Camilla placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palm from his early morning rowing sessions, the strength in his fingers as they closed around hers. He led her onto the dance floor with the same commanding presence he brought to everything else, but there was something different in the way he held her. One hand settled at her waist, while the other cradled her fingers against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat through the fine fabric of his tuxedo, rapid, intense, matching the rhythm of her own. "You realize everyone is watching us," Camilla murmured as they began to move together. "Let them watch." His voice was a whisper against her temple as he drew her closer. "I don't care about anyone else in this room." They moved together as if they had been dancing for years, their bodies finding a natural rhythm that had nothing to do with the orchestra and everything to do with the electricity sparking between them. Richard's thumb traced small circles against her waist, a touch so intimate it made her knees weak. "Camilla," he said her name like a prayer. "Yes? What are you doing to me?" The vulnerability in his question caught her off guard. This wasn't the commanding CEO who barked orders and expected immediate compliance. This was a man stripped of his armor, honest and raw, and completely, utterly focused on her. "Nothing you don't want me to do," she replied, her voice barely audible over the music. His grip tightened on her waist, pulling her closer until there was barely an inch of space between them. "That's what scares me." The song ended, but neither of them moved to separate. They stood there in the center of the dance floor, lost in each other's eyes, while around them the world continued to spin. And in that moment, Camilla realized that everything was about to change. The question was whether either of them was ready for what came next. The terrace overlooking Central Park was empty, except for the two of them. Richard had guided Camilla away from the ballroom's glittering chaos without a word, his hand warm and possessive against her lower back as they stepped into the cool October air. The city sprawled below them like a constellation of dreams and ambitions, but all Camilla could focus on was the man standing beside her, his profile sharp against the backdrop of twinkling lights. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the marble balustrade as if anchoring himself against a storm. "About what?" "About being seen with your assistant." There was no accusation in her voice, only quiet understanding. "About what people will think, what they'll say." Richard turned to face her, his grey eyes searching her face in the moonlight. "Do you know what I was thinking about in there, while we were dancing?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I was thinking about the Morrison contract. Do you remember it? The one where you caught the liability clause that would have cost us $12 million. I remember. You handed me that revision at 7 in the morning, perfectly formatted, with 3 alternative solutions attached." His voice grew softer, more intimate. "And I barely looked at you. I took your work, signed my name to the deal, and walked into that boardroom like I had solved the problem myself." The admission hung between them, heavy with regret. Camilla felt something shift in her chest. Not surprise, but a deep recognition of a pattern she had learned to navigate with grace. "That's your job, Mr. Walker. Leading, making decisions." "No." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. "My job is recognizing exceptional talent when it's right in front of me, and I failed completely." A cool breeze swept across the terrace, causing Camilla's hair to flutter around her shoulders. Richard's gaze followed the movement with an intensity that made heat pool low in her stomach. "You want to know what else I was thinking about?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Tell me. How many times I've heard you on phone calls, switching effortlessly between English, Spanish, and Portuguese with international clients. How you always know exactly what I need before I ask for it. How you've never once, not once, made me feel like I was asking too much of you." He reached up, his fingers grazing her cheek with reverent gentleness. "How beautiful you are when you think no one is watching you work. How you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating, and how your eyes light up when you solve a particularly difficult problem." Camilla's breath caught. "Richard, I've been watching you, Camilla, more than I realized, more than I should have." His thumb traced along her jaw, leaving fire in its wake. "And tonight, seeing you like this, it's not that you've changed. It's that I finally have the courage to admit what I've been feeling." The vulnerability in his confession made her heart race. This wasn't the commanding executive she worked for. This was a man stripped bare, honest and raw, and completely focused on her. "And what have you been feeling?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything." The word escaped like a confession. "Admiration, desire, respect." He paused, his forehead almost touching hers. "Things I have no right to feel for someone who works for me." "Why?" The simple question seemed to catch him off guard. "Because it's inappropriate. Because you depend on me for your livelihood. Because I could destroy your career with a word, and that makes any relationship between us inherently unequal." Camilla studied his face, seeing the internal war playing out behind his eyes. Here was Richard Walker, billionaire, corporate titan, man who bent entire industries to his will, paralyzed by the possibility of taking advantage of someone he cared about. "Do you want to know what I think?" she said, placing her hand flat against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. "Always. I think you're giving me far less credit than I deserve." Her voice was steady, confident. "I'm not some helpless employee trapped by circumstances, Richard. I'm a woman who chose to work for you because you challenged me, because your company was the best place for me to grow professionally." She stepped closer, eliminating the last inches between them. "And I'm a woman who's been attracted to you for months, despite every professional instinct telling me it was a terrible idea." His sharp intake of breath was audible. "Camilla, you think you hold all the power here? You think I'm at your mercy?" A smile played at the corners of her lips. "I could have another job by tomorrow morning. Cordelia Fairmont offered me a position tonight, did you notice? And that was before she even knew my full name." Richard's eyes widened slightly. He had been so focused on Camilla herself that he'd missed the subtle recruitment attempt happening right in front of him. "I stay at Walker Enterprises because I choose to," she continued, her hand moving to rest against his neck, feeling his pulse jump under her touch. "Just like I'm standing here with you now because I choose to. Not because I have to. Not because I'm afraid of the consequences, but because this, whatever this is between us, is worth the risk." The sound of laughter and music drifted from the ballroom behind them, but it felt like it came from another world. Richard stared down at her, this woman who had just systematically dismantled every argument he had constructed against pursuing her. "You realize this changes everything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Good," she replied without hesitation. "I was getting tired of pretending I didn't notice the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention." "How do I look at you?" "Like you're drowning and I'm the only one who knows how to swim." The metaphor hit him like a physical blow, accurate in a way that was almost painful. He had been drowning, in responsibility, in expectations, in the relentless pursuit of success that left no room for genuine connection. And somehow, this extraordinary woman had become his lifeline, without him even realizing it. "Camilla," he whispered her name like a prayer. "Yes, if we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back." She rose up on her toes, bringing her lips close to his ear. "Who says I want to go back?" The challenge in her voice shattered the last of his restraint. His arms came around her, pulling her against him with desperate need, and when their lips met it was like coming home and launching into the unknown all at the same time. The kiss was everything, tender and fierce, gentle and consuming. Richard tasted like champagne and possibility, while Camilla felt like salvation and sin wrapped in silk and starlight. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Richard rested his forehead against hers. "What happens now?" he asked. Camilla smiled, her lips still tingling from his kiss. "Now we figure out if you're brave enough to fall in love with your assistant, and if you're brave enough to fall in love with your boss." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with promise and peril in equal measure. And as the city sparkled beneath them, both of them realized they were already falling. The elevator to the 42nd floor had never felt so small. Camilla stood perfectly composed in her charcoal blazer and pencil skirt, her hair swept back into its usual professional style, but her pulse hammered against her throat as the numbers climbed higher. 18 hours had passed since Richard's lips had claimed hers on that moonlit terrace, since he had whispered her name like a man discovering religion, since everything between them had shifted irrevocably. Now she was back to being his assistant, supposedly. The elevator chimed softly as it reached their floor, and Camilla stepped into the familiar territory of Walker Enterprises' executive wing. The morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows painted everything in golden hues, but the atmosphere felt electric with unspoken tension. Her heels clicked against the marble as she approached her desk. Noting that Richard's office door was already closed, yellow light visible beneath the gap. He had arrived early, not unusual for him, but today it felt significant. Was he avoiding her? Regretting last night? Preparing to transfer her to another department to avoid the complications she represented? "Good morning, Camilla." She turned to find Tobias Hawthorne, the company's chief financial officer, approaching with a knowing smile. Tobias was one of the few executives who had always treated her with genuine respect, recognizing her contributions rather than seeing her as merely Richard's scheduling coordinator. "Good morning, Tobias. The quarterly reports you requested are on your desk. Efficient as always." His eyes twinkled with mischief. "Though I have to say, you caused quite the stir last night. Half the board is wondering who Richard's mysterious companion was, and the other half is trying to figure out how to poach you for their own companies." Heat crept up Camilla's neck, but her expression remained professionally neutral. It was a lovely event for a worthy cause. Indeed it was. Tobias's gaze grew more serious. "Camilla, I hope you know that your value to this company extends far beyond your administrative skills. Richard may be brilliant, but he's not the only one who's noticed your strategic thinking." Before she could respond, Richard's office door opened with more force than necessary. He stood in the doorway, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored, his dark hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. When his grey eyes met hers across the space, the impact was immediate and devastating. "Tobias?" Richard's voice carried its usual authority, but there was an underlying tension that made Camilla's breath catch. "Don't you have a board meeting to prepare for?" "I do indeed." Tobias's smile widened as he glanced between them. "Good luck today, both of you." As Tobias disappeared into the elevator, silence settled over the executive floor like morning mist. Richard's gaze never left Camilla's face, and she found herself remembering the taste of champagne on his lips, the way his hands had trembled slightly when they framed her face. "Miss Brown," he said formally, but his voice carried an intimacy that made her name sound like a caress. "Could I see you in my office, please?" She nodded, gathering her tablet and notepad with steady hands despite the chaos in her chest. As she approached his office, Richard stepped aside to let her pass, and she caught his scent, cedar and something uniquely masculine that made her knees weak. The office door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo like a gunshot. "Sit," Richard said, then immediately shook his head. "Please sit." Camilla settled into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, crossing her legs with unconscious elegance. Richard remained standing, his hands shoved deep in his trouser pockets, his expression unreadable. "How are you?" he asked, the question loaded with meaning. "I'm well, thank you." She tilted her head slightly, studying his face. "Are you?" Instead of answering, he moved to the window overlooking Manhattan, his broad shoulders tense beneath his jacket. "I didn't sleep. Neither did I." He turned at her admission, his gray eyes intense. "Regrets?" "None." The word was immediate, unwavering. "You?" "Only that I waited so long to be honest with you." He moved closer, stopping just short of her chair. "Camilla, we need to talk about how this affects—" A sharp knock interrupted him. "Mr. Walker?" The voice belonged to Genevieve Laurent, the head of human resources, a woman known for her impeccable timing and worse discretion. Richard's jaw clenched. "Come in." Genevieve entered with her characteristic brisk efficiency, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, her expression professionally neutral. "I apologize for interrupting, but we need to discuss the Sinclair account. There are some complications." Camilla started to rise. "I'll give you privacy." "Stay," Richard said quickly, then moderated his tone. "Please. You're more familiar with the Sinclair details than anyone." Genevieve's eyebrows rose slightly at the request, but she took the seat beside Camilla. "Very well. It seems Morrison Sinclair is threatening to pull their contract. They claim there were discrepancies in the third quarter projections." Camilla frowned, her analytical mind immediately engaging. "That's impossible. I personally verified every figure against their internal reports." "You worked on the Sinclair account?" Genevieve asked, surprise coloring her voice. "Miss Brown handles all our major client analysis," Richard said, his tone carrying a note of pride that made Camilla's heart flutter. "She's been integral to our success with international accounts." "I see." Genevieve's expression grew thoughtful. "Perhaps we should consider promoting her to senior account manager. The position comes with a significant salary increase and her own office." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Camilla felt Richard's gaze on her, waiting for her reaction. A promotion would solve their ethical dilemma. She would no longer be his direct subordinate, but it would also mean less time working together, fewer opportunities for the subtle intimacy that had developed between them. "That's a generous offer," Camilla said carefully, "but I'm quite happy in my current position." "Are you?" Richard's question was quiet, loaded with subtext only she could interpret. "Yes." She met his gaze steadily. "I am." Genevieve looked between them with sharp intelligence, clearly sensing undercurrents she couldn't quite identify. "Well, regardless, we need to address the Sinclair situation immediately." For the next hour, they worked through the crisis with practiced efficiency. Camilla's analysis revealed that Sinclair's complaints were based on outdated information, while Richard's strategic mind crafted a solution that would not only retain their business, but expand the partnership. Watching them work together, Genevieve began to understand why Richard guarded his assistant so carefully. They functioned like two parts of the same brilliant machine. When Genevieve finally left, Richard and Camilla were alone again. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the office. "You could have taken the promotion," Richard said quietly. "I could have." Camilla rose from her chair, moving to stand beside him at the window. "But then who would catch your mistakes?" He laughed, a rich, genuine sound she heard too rarely. "Is that why you stay? To keep me humble?" "Among other reasons." She turned to face him, noting the way the light caught the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "Richard, what happened last night wasn't a mistake, and I won't let you convince yourself it was." He stared down at her, this woman who had systematically dismantled every wall he had built around his heart. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that some things are worth the complication." She stepped closer, close enough to see his pulse jump at the base of his throat. "I'm saying that I'm not afraid of what people might think or say." "Are you?" "Terrified," he admitted, but not for the reasons you might expect. Then what? I'm terrified that I'll disappoint you, that you'll realize I'm not the man you think I am. The vulnerability in his confession made her chest tight with emotion. Here was Richard Walker, master of the universe, feared and respected in boardrooms around the world, afraid that he wasn't worthy of her affection. "You want to know a secret?" she whispered, reaching up to straighten his tie with gentle fingers. "Always. I've never been interested in perfect men. They're boring." Her lips curved in a smile that made his breath catch. "I'm interested in real men, complicated men. Men who challenge me and surprise me and make me want to be better than I thought I could be. And do I do that? Every single day." The space between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Richard's hand rose to cup her face, his thumb tracing the elegant line of her cheekbone. "This is dangerous," he murmured. "The best things usually are." And as he leaned down to capture her lips in a kiss that tasted like coffee and possibility, both of them realized they were already far beyond the point of turning back. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Richard's penthouse like impatient fingers, casting shifting shadows across the hardwood floors. Camilla stood at the window, still wearing her work clothes, but somehow looking entirely at home in the masculine elegance of his living space. She had kicked off her heels hours ago, and Richard found himself mesmerized by the graceful curve of her bare feet against his Persian rug. "You're staring," she said without turning around, a smile evident in her voice. Guilty as charged. He approached from behind, carrying 2 glasses of wine, a vintage Bordeaux he had been saving for a special occasion. "Though I'm discovering I have 18 months of staring to catch up on." She turned to accept the wine, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Even that small contact sent electricity racing up his arm. "Is that how long you've been interested?" "Longer." The admission escaped before he could censor it. "I just didn't let myself acknowledge it." They settled onto his leather sofa, the city lights twinkling beyond the rain-streaked windows. Camilla tucked her legs beneath her with unconscious grace, and Richard marveled at how natural she looked in his space, as if she had always belonged there. "Tell me something about yourself that's not in your personnel file," he said, studying her face in the soft lamplight. "What makes you think there's anything? Because you're the most intriguing woman I've ever met, and I have a feeling I've barely scratched the surface." Camilla swirled the wine in her glass, considering. "I have a master's degree in international business from Columbia." Richard nearly choked on his wine. "What?" "And I speak 5 languages fluently." She took a sip, watching his reaction over the rim of her glass. "Portuguese, Spanish, French, Mandarin and English, obviously." 5. He set down his glass, staring at her with newfound amazement. "Camilla, why are you working as an assistant? You could be running your own company with those qualifications." "Because I wanted to learn from the best." Her answer was matter-of-fact, but her eyes held depths he was only beginning to understand. "Do you know how many corporate executives think they're brilliant, but can't see past their own egos? I wanted to work for someone who actually was brilliant, even if he was too proud to notice the people around him." Ouch. But he was smiling as he said it. "So, you've been studying me." "For 18 months. I know you take your coffee black at 7:30, but you switch to espresso at 2 when the afternoon energy lag hits. I know you bite the inside of your cheek when you're frustrated, and you tap your Mont Blanc pen exactly 3 times before making important decisions." Richard felt exposed, seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "What else?" "I know you blame yourself for your father's heart attack, even though the stress of building Walker Enterprises wasn't what killed him. It was genetics and too many cigars." Her voice grew softer. "I know you work 16-hour days because you're afraid of being alone with your thoughts. And I know you've never let anyone get close enough to really know you because you're terrified they'll leave when they realize you're just as flawed as everyone else." The accuracy of her assessment hit him like a physical blow. He stood abruptly, moving to the window, his hands braced against the frame. The rain had intensified, turning the city into an impressionist painting of blurred lights and motion. "How?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I've been watching you the same way you've been watching me." She rose from the sofa, approaching him with careful steps. "Because I recognize someone else who's built walls to protect themselves." "And what walls have you built, Camilla?" She was close enough now that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that had been driving him to distraction all evening. "I let people underestimate me because it's easier than fighting for recognition. I shouldn't have to earn twice as hard as everyone else." The quiet pain in her voice made him turn to face her. "Because you're black. Because I'm a black woman in corporate America." She met his gaze steadily. Do you know how many meetings I've sat in where I had the best idea in the room but no one heard it until a white man repeated it 5 minutes later? Richard's jaw clenched. At Walker Enterprises. Everywhere, Richard. It's not specific to your company. She touched his arm gently. But you want to know the difference between you and every other executive I've worked for? Tell me. You actually listen when I speak. You've never once taken credit for my ideas or dismissed my contributions. Her fingers traced along his forearm, leaving fire in their wake. That's why I stayed. That's why I've been content to be underestimated by everyone else, as long as you saw my value. I didn't just see your value. He captured her hand in his, bringing it to his lips. I came to depend on it, on you. Is that what scares you? Depending on someone? It terrifies me. His honesty was raw, unguarded. My mother left when I was 12. She said she couldn't handle being married to my father's work anymore. She wanted a husband who came home for dinner, who remembered birthdays, who chose family over profit margins. And you think you're just like him? I know I am. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. 16-hour days, obsession with success, inability to prioritize anything over business. I'm exactly the kind of man women leave. Camilla stepped closer, her free hand coming up to frame his face. You want to know what I think? Always. I think you're so afraid of becoming your father that you've forgotten you have choices he never had. Her thumb traced along his cheekbone with devastating tenderness. I think you work those 16-hour days because no one has ever given you a reason to come home. The words hit him like a revelation. Camilla, I'm not your mother, Richard. I'm not looking for a man who comes home at 5:30 every night and never talks about work. She rose up on her toes, bringing their faces closer. I'm looking for a partner, someone who challenges me, who respects my mind as much as he desires my body. Someone who understands that love isn't about giving up who you are. It's about finding someone who loves exactly who you are. And you think I could be that person? I think you already are. The kiss was inevitable, urgent with 18 months of suppressed longing and newfound understanding. Richard's arms came around her, pulling her against him with desperate need, while Camilla's hands fisted in his shirt, as if anchoring herself to him. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Richard rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to be in love without losing myself. Then we'll figure it out together. Her smile was radiant with possibility. Because I'm not going anywhere, Richard Walker. You're stuck with me. Promise? I promise. And as the rain continued to fall outside, washing the city clean, both of them felt like they were finally ready to let someone else see all the secret, vulnerable parts of themselves they had kept hidden for so long. The scary thing wasn't falling in love. The scary thing was realizing they already had. The last thing Camilla expected to find in Richard's office at 7 in the morning was her younger brother sitting across from his desk, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Marcus! She froze in the doorway, her usual composure shattered by the sight of the 22-year-old she'd helped raise after their parents died in a car accident 5 years ago. And what are you doing here? Richard looked up from the folder in his hands, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes apologetic. Marcus, tall and lean with Camilla's same warm brown skin and intelligent eyes, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his Columbia University sweatshirt a stark contrast to the executive sophistication surrounding him. Hey, sis. Marcus's voice carried a note of defiance, mixed with shame. Surprise? Marcus applied for our summer internship program, Richard said carefully, setting down the folder. I was just reviewing his application. Camilla's mind raced as she processed the implications. Her brother knew she worked for Walker Enterprises, but she had never told him exactly who Richard was to her, or what he was becoming. To Marcus, Richard Walker was just her demanding boss, not the man she had spent the previous evening kissing in the rain-soaked privacy of his penthouse. Could I have a moment with my brother? She asked, her professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Of course. Richard rose from his chair, but as he passed her in the doorway, his fingers brushed against hers in a gesture of support, so subtle only she would notice it. I'll be in the conference room reviewing the quarterly projections. When the door closed behind him, leaving them alone, Camilla turned to face her brother with arms crossed and eyebrows raised, a look Marcus knew well from their years of sisterly lectures about grades and curfews. Explain. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd never outgrown. I need the internship, Cam. My scholarship covers tuition, but I need work experience for my business degree. When I saw Walker Enterprises was hiring, I figured, maybe you could put in a good word. You figured you could use nepotism to get ahead. That's not... He stopped, frustrated. Look, I'm qualified. My GPA is 3.8. I've got recommendation letters from 3 professors, and I wrote the best damn application essay of my life. I'm not asking you to get me the job. I'm just asking you not to stand in my way if I earn it. Camilla studied her brother's face, seeing the stubborn determination that mirrored her own. Marcus had always been brilliant. Too brilliant for his own good sometimes, but he'd also inherited their father's pride and their mother's unwillingness to back down from a challenge. Marcus, do you understand what position this puts me in? What do you mean? She sank into the chair Richard had vacated, choosing her words carefully. Mr. Walker values my professional judgment. If I recommend you and you don't perform well, it reflects poorly on me. If I don't recommend you and you're clearly qualified, it looks like I'm sabotaging you. So what are you saying? I'm saying that if you want this internship, you'll have to earn it entirely on your own merit. She leaned forward, her expression serious. No special treatment because you're my brother. No inside information about projects or clients. And if you screw up, I won't be able to protect you. Marcus grinned, the same mischievous smile that had gotten him into trouble throughout their childhood. Wouldn't want it any other way, sis. I'm not asking for protection. I'm asking for a chance. A knock on the door interrupted them. Richard entered, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. I apologize for interrupting, but I have the Morrison meeting in 15 minutes. Of course. Camilla rose, smoothing her skirt with automatic precision. Marcus was just leaving. Actually, Richard said, his gaze moving between the siblings, I was hoping Mr. Brown could stay for a few more minutes. I have some questions about his application. Camilla felt a flutter of panic in her chest. She had worked so hard to keep her professional and personal lives separate, and now they were colliding in ways she couldn't control. I'll leave you to it then, she said, moving toward the door. Miss Brown. Richard's voice stopped her. Could you cancel my 10 o'clock and push the Morrison meeting to 10:30? I have a feeling this conversation might run longer than expected. Their eyes met across the room, and she saw understanding there. He knew this was important to her, and he was giving her brother the time and attention he deserved. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the man she was falling in love with. Of course, Mr. Walker. As she settled at her desk outside Richard's office, Camilla found herself straining to hear the conversation, taking place behind the closed door. She couldn't make out specific words, but she could hear the rhythm of question and response, the occasional laugh from Marcus that meant he was relaxing into the interview. 20 minutes later, the door opened, and both men emerged, Richard's hand extended in what was clearly a concluding handshake. Thank you for your time, Mr. Walker, Marcus said, his voice more confident than when he'd arrived. I look forward to hearing from you. You'll hear from HR by the end of the week, Richard replied. Miss Brown, could I see you for a moment? As Marcus gathered his backpack and headed for the elevator, he paused at Camilla's desk. Thanks for not interfering, he said quietly. And Cam, your boss is pretty cool, way cooler than you made him sound. After Marcus left, Camilla entered Richard's office to find him standing at the window, his hands in his pockets and a thoughtful expression on his face. Well, she asked, settling into the chair her brother had vacated. He's brilliant, sharp as hell, with ideas that could revolutionize our international expansion strategy. Richard turned to face her. He's also stubborn, opinionated, and completely unimpressed by authority figures. So he reminds you of someone? He reminds me of his sister. Richard's smile was warm, fond, though he lacks your diplomatic skills. Are you going to offer him the internship? Do you want me to? The question was loaded with implication. Richard was giving her the choice, acknowledging that this decision affected her as much as it affected Marcus. I want you to do what's best for Walker Enterprises, she said carefully. That's not what I asked. Camilla met his gaze, seeing the man who had kissed her breathless just 12 hours ago, the man who was learning to trust her with his vulnerabilities. Yes, she admitted, I want you to offer him the internship, but only if he truly deserves it. He does. Richard moved closer, stopping just short of her chair. Though I have to warn you, having your brother work here is going to complicate things. How so? Because I won't be able to look at him without thinking about how much I want to kiss his sister. Heat flooded Camilla's cheeks, but she maintained her composure. I trust you to be professional, Mr. Walker. Do you? He leaned down, bracing his hands on the arms of her chair, bringing his face dangerously close to hers. Because right now, all I can think about is how beautiful you look when you're proud of someone you love. Richard, her voice was barely a whisper. He's lucky to have you as a sister. And I'm lucky to have you as—" He paused, searching for the right words. "As what?" "As mine." The possession in his voice sent shivers down her spine. "Is that what I am? Aren't you?" Instead of answering, she rose from the chair, bringing them even closer together. "Maybe you should ask me properly." "Camilla Brown," he said, his voice low and intense. "Will you be mine? Only if you'll be mine in return. Deal." As he leaned down to seal their agreement with a kiss, neither of them heard the soft footsteps in the hallway outside, or noticed the shadow that paused briefly at the frosted glass door before continuing on. But someone had seen them together, and by the end of the day that someone would make sure everyone else knew about it too. The gossip started like all office gossip, as a whisper in the break room that grew into speculation by the water cooler, then bloomed into full-blown rumor by lunchtime. Camilla felt the shift in atmosphere the moment she stepped off the elevator Wednesday morning. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when she passed, eyes followed her with new interest, and smiles carried undertones she couldn't quite decipher. By the time she reached her desk, 3 different people had found excuses to walk past Richard's office, their gazes lingering on her with poorly concealed curiosity. "Interesting morning," commented Delphine Reeves, the sharp-tongued head of marketing, as she approached Camilla's desk with what appeared to be routine paperwork. Delphine was known for her ability to extract information from stone statues and her talent for spreading it just as efficiently. "How so?" Camilla kept her voice professionally neutral while reviewing Richard's schedule for the day. "Oh, just the usual office chatter." Delphine's smile was razor-thin. "You know how people love to speculate about their superiors' personal lives." A chill ran down Camilla's spine, but her expression remained composed. "I wouldn't know. I don't participate in gossip." "Of course not. You're far too professional for that." Delphine's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "Though I have to say you looked absolutely radiant at the charity gala Monday night. That dress was stunning." "Thank you." Richard certainly seemed to think so. "You two made quite the striking couple on the dance floor." The word couple hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Camilla met Delphine's gaze steadily, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "Mr. Walker was very gracious to include me in such an important company event," she said diplomatically. "Include you?" Delphine laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "My dear, half the city's social elite couldn't stop talking about you two. The way he looked at you, the way you moved together. It was quite the performance." Before Camilla could respond, Richard's office door opened and he emerged, looking every inch the commanding CEO in his navy suit and steel-grey tie. His gaze immediately found hers, and for just a moment his professional mask slipped enough to reveal the warmth beneath. "Miss Brown, do you have the Henderson contracts ready for review?" "On your desk, sir. I also rescheduled your 3 o'clock to accommodate the call with Tokyo." "Excellent." His eyes lingered on her face a beat longer than strictly professional, before turning to Delphine. "Mrs. Reeves, don't you have a campaign presentation to prepare?" "Indeed I do." Delphine's smile never wavered, but her eyes were calculating. "Have a productive day, both of you." As she glided away, Camilla felt Richard's questioning gaze on her. She followed him into his office, closing the door behind them with perhaps more force than necessary. "What was that about?" Richard asked immediately. "Office gossip." Camilla moved to the window, needing the space to think clearly. "Apparently our dance Monday night caused quite the stir." Richard's jaw tightened. "What kind of stir?" "The kind where people are speculating about our relationship." She turned to face him, noting the way his hands clenched at his sides. "Richard, if this gets back to the board—" "Let me worry about the board." He moved closer, his voice dropping to the intimate tone that made her knees weak. "The only thing I care about is whether this bothers you." "Of course it bothers me." The admission escaped before she could stop it. "Not because I'm ashamed of what's happening between us, but because I don't want people to think I've compromised my professional integrity. Anyone who knows you would never think that. But not everyone knows me the way you do." She pressed her fingers to her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. "God, I knew this would happen. I knew the moment we crossed that line." "Camilla." Richard's hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steadying. "Look at me." She met his gaze, seeing determination and something fiercer burning in his grey eyes. "I won't let anyone question your competence or your character," he said quietly. "Not while I'm breathing. You can't protect me from office politics, Richard, and you shouldn't have to. Watch me." The conviction in his voice sent warmth flooding through her chest, but it also terrified her. Richard Walker was a man accustomed to controlling every variable in his environment, but gossip was like wildfire, unpredictable and impossible to contain once it started spreading. A knock on the door interrupted them. Richard's hands dropped from her shoulders as Tobias entered, his usually jovial expression serious. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem." Tobias closed the door behind him, his gaze moving between them with newfound understanding. "The Morrison deal is in jeopardy. Apparently someone called their offices this morning with concerns about Walker Enterprises' internal stability." "What kind of concerns?" Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. "The kind that suggests our executive team might be distracted by personal entanglements." Tobias's expression was apologetic but firm. "Richard, I need to ask you directly. Is there any truth to the rumors circulating about you and Camilla?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Camilla felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited for Richard's response. This was the moment of truth, the moment that would define not just their relationship, but potentially their careers. Richard straightened to his full height, every inch the commanding presence that had built Walker Enterprises from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. "Yes," he said simply. Tobias's eyebrows rose. "Yes? Camilla and I are involved romantically." Richard's voice was steady, unwavering. "We have been for several days, though our feelings for each other developed over many months." "Richard," Camilla whispered, shocked by his openness. "No." He turned to face her, his expression fierce with protectiveness. "I won't lie about this. I won't pretend that what we have is something to be ashamed of." Tobias ran a hand through his graying hair. "Do you have any idea what this means for the company? For both of your careers?" "I know exactly what it means." Richard moved to stand beside Camilla, a united front. "And I'm prepared to deal with the consequences, which are an emergency board meeting at minimum, possibly calls for my resignation if they believe my judgment has been compromised." Richard's voice was calm, but Camilla could see the tension in his jaw, and almost certainly demands for Camilla's transfer or termination. "No!" The word exploded from Camilla before she could stop it. Both men turned to look at her, and she felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. "I won't be the reason Walker Enterprises suffers. I won't be the reason you lose everything you've built. Camilla, I'll tender my resignation today." Her voice was steady despite the way her heart was breaking. "Effective immediately. That should satisfy the board and protect the company's reputation." "Absolutely not." Richard's response was immediate, fierce. "I won't let you sacrifice your career for mine, and I won't let you sacrifice yours for a relationship that's barely begun." They stared at each other across the space of Richard's office, two people who had found love at exactly the wrong moment, in exactly the wrong circumstances. Tobias cleared his throat softly. There might be another option. Both of them turned to him with desperate hope. "What kind of option?" Richard asked. "The kind that requires both of you to be willing to fight for what you want, instead of running from it." And as Tobias began to outline a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane, Camilla realized that sometimes the most dangerous gambles were the only ones worth taking. The boardroom at Walker Enterprises had never felt more like a battlefield. 12 of the city's most powerful executives sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. At the head of the table, Richard maintained his composure despite the weight of their scrutiny, while Camilla sat 2 chairs to his right, her spine straight and her hands folded with deceptive calm in her lap. "This is highly irregular," declared Bartholomew Ashford, the silver-haired chairman of the board whose family had been involved with Walker Enterprises since its inception. "Calling an emergency meeting to discuss personal relationships is hardly appropriate use of board time." "With respect, Bartholomew," Richard replied, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded this room for 8 years, "when those personal relationships are being used to undermine multi-million-dollar deals, they become company business." Murmurs rippled around the table. Camilla felt every gaze like a physical weight, but she kept her expression professionally neutral despite the storm raging in her chest. Tobias cleared his throat from his position at Richard's left. "Before we proceed with accusations and demands for resignations, I think the board deserves to know the full truth about Miss Brown's contributions to this company." "Her contributions?" Delphine's voice dripped with false sweetness from her seat near the far end of the table. "I think we're all aware that Miss Brown is a capable assistant." "Assistant?" Tobias's laugh cut through her condescension like a blade. "Bartholomew, do you remember the Nakamura merger 3 years ago? The one that saved us from bankruptcy after the Singapore expansion failed? Of course, Richard's strategic brilliance turned a potential disaster into our biggest success story. Actually, Tobias opened the folder in front of him, that strategic brilliance belonged to Miss Brown. The room fell silent. Richard's eyes widened as he stared at his CFO, while Camilla felt her carefully constructed professional world beginning to shift. I don't understand, Bartholomew said slowly. The Nakamura strategy, the approach that saved this company and established our dominance in the Asian markets, was developed entirely by Camilla Brown during her first month as Richard's assistant. Tobias pulled out a series of documents, sliding them across the table. Her original analysis, her projection models, her risk assessments, all of it. That's impossible, Delphine sputtered. She's not even educated in international business, Columbia University, summa cum laude, Tobias continued relentlessly, followed by strategic analysis work at Morrison Klein before she joined us. Oh, and she speaks 5 languages fluently, which is how she was able to conduct the direct negotiations with Nakamura's team in Japanese, something Richard himself cannot do. Richard stared at Camilla, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized existed clicking into place. The late nights you worked on the merger documents, the calls you took in different languages. I thought you were just translating for me. I was, Camilla said quietly, among other things. But why? His voice was barely above a whisper. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you take credit? For the first time since entering the boardroom, Camilla's composure cracked slightly. Because you needed to succeed. Because Walker Enterprises needed strong leadership after the Singapore disaster. Because a 23-year-old black woman with a business degree couldn't have gotten the respect from international partners that you commanded just by walking into a room. The honesty of her admission hit the room like a physical blow. So you let me take credit for your work, Richard said, understanding flooding his voice with something that sounded like awe and heartbreak combined. I let you lead with my support, she corrected. There's a difference. Tobias wasn't finished. The Henderson account that brought in $50 million last year, Camilla's expansion strategy, the Morrison deal that everyone's so worried about, she identified the legal loopholes that made it possible, the Sinclair projections that prevented a $12 million loss, her analysis. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping the stunned faces around the table. For 3 years you've all been praising Richard Walker's brilliance, while completely ignoring the woman who made half of it possible. And now you want to destroy her career because she dared to fall in love with the man she's been propping up? That's enough, Richard said, but his voice carried no anger, only a deep, painful understanding of what had been happening under his nose for years. No, it's not enough. Camilla rose from her chair, her composure returning with devastating force. Mr. Tobias is right about my contributions to this company, but he's wrong about one thing. I didn't prop Richard up. I partnered with him, even when he didn't know that's what was happening. She moved to stand behind her chair, her hands resting on its back, her gaze steady as she addressed the room. Richard Walker is brilliant. His vision, his leadership, his ability to inspire confidence in investors and clients, that's all him. What I brought was analytical depth, cultural understanding and strategic thinking that complemented his strengths. Why are you telling us this now? Bartholomew asked, his voice softer than before. Because I won't let my relationship with Richard be used as a weapon against either of us. Her voice grew stronger, more commanding. Because if you're going to judge our competence, you should judge it based on results, not gossip. And because if this board is foolish enough to lose either one of us over office politics, Morrison Klein has already offered me a senior partnership with a signing bonus that would make your head spin. The threat was delivered with silk-wrapped steel, and its impact was immediate. Morrison Klein was Walker Enterprises' biggest competitor, and losing someone with Camilla's skills to them would be catastrophic. You're threatening us. Delphine's voice was shrill with outrage. I'm informing you. Camilla's smile was razor-sharp. Just like I'm informing you that Richard and I have no intention of hiding our relationship, compromising our professional standards, or letting anyone use our personal lives to undermine this company. Richard stood, moving to her side in a gesture of solidarity that spoke louder than words. The board has a choice to make. You can accept that 2 of your most valuable employees have found happiness together, or you can lose both of us to competitors who are smart enough to recognize talent regardless of who we're sleeping with. The crude directness of his statement sent shockwaves through the room, but it also carried an unmistakable challenge. Bartholomew was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled as he considered. Finally, he looked up, his expression thoughtful. Miss Brown, what exactly are you proposing? A promotion to senior strategic advisor, reporting directly to the board rather than to Richard, a salary commensurate with my actual contributions to this company, and a clear policy stating that romantic relationships between employees are permissible as long as they don't create conflicts of interest or compromise professional standards. And if we refuse? Camilla and Richard exchanged a look that spoke of years of unspoken partnership and newfound personal connection. Then you'll be looking for a new CEO and losing your best strategic mind to your biggest competitor, Richard said calmly. Your choice. The silence that followed was deafening, and in that silence, both of them realized they had just gambled everything on each other, their careers, their reputations, and their future. The only question now was whether their love was strong enough to survive what came next. The minutes ticked by like hours. Bartholomew Ashford sat in contemplative silence, his weathered fingers drumming against the mahogany table, while the other board members exchanged uncertain glances. The weight of the decision hung over the room like storm clouds, and Camilla could feel her heart hammering against her ribs despite her outward composure. Richard stood beside her chair, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos of her emotions. She had just revealed 3 years of hidden contributions, threatened the board of one of New York's most powerful corporations, and gambled both their careers on a love that was barely a week old. She had never been more terrified, or more certain of anything in her life. Miss Brown, Bartholomew finally spoke, his voice carrying the gravity of his 73 years and 4 decades in corporate leadership. These contributions you've outlined, do you have documentation to support them? Every strategy session, every late-night revision, every international call. Tobias slid a thick portfolio across the table. I've been keeping detailed records because I knew someday the truth would need to come out. Why? Delphine's voice was sharp with suspicion. What possible motivation could you have for concealing Miss Brown's alleged contributions? Because I recognize exceptional talent when I see it, Tobias replied calmly. And because I knew that a young black woman's ideas would carry more weight coming from Richard Walker's reputation than from her own credentials, regardless of how impressive those credentials were. The brutal honesty of his statement silenced the room. It was an uncomfortable truth that everyone present understood, but no one wanted to acknowledge. That's a serious accusation, murmured Cordelia Westbrook, the newest board member and head of their diversity initiatives. It's not an accusation, Camilla said quietly. It's reality, and it's exactly why I made the choice to work behind the scenes instead of fighting battles I couldn't win 3 years ago. She moved to stand at the foot of the conference table, commanding the room's attention with the same presence that had made her indispensable to Richard. But I'm not the same woman I was 3 years ago. I've learned from the best leaders in the business. I've proven my worth through results, not rhetoric, and I'm no longer willing to let other people define what I'm capable of achieving. And what exactly are you capable of achieving? Bartholomew asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier skepticism. I can increase our Asian market share by 30% within 18 months, using the expansion strategy I developed for the Shanghai office. I can streamline our international operations to save approximately $8 million annually. And I can negotiate the partnership with Johannesburg Mining that Richard's been pursuing for 2 years, because unlike anyone else in this room, I speak Afrikaans and understand the cultural nuances that have been stalling those talks. The specificity of her proposals hit the room like lightning. These weren't vague promises. They were detailed strategies backed by the kind of deep analysis that had built Walker Enterprises' reputation. "Do you speak Afrikaans?" Richard asked, staring at her with newfound amazement. Among other things, her smile was soft, intimate, meant only for him. "There's a lot you don't know about me yet." Apparently, his voice carried wonder and something deeper, the kind of pride that came from realizing the woman he loved was even more extraordinary than he'd imagined. Bartholomew cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the matter at hand. "Miss Brown, your ultimatum puts this board in a difficult position." "How so?" "If we agree to your terms, we're essentially admitting that we've been blind to exceptional talent for 3 years. If we refuse, we lose 2 of our most valuable employees to our biggest competitor." He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "It's quite the strategic checkmate." "I prefer to think of it as a win-win opportunity," Camilla replied diplomatically. "Do you?" Delphine's laugh was bitter. "And what about the appearance of impropriety? What about the message this sends about professional boundaries?" "What message?" Richard stepped forward, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. That talented people are valued regardless of their personal relationships, that love and professional competence aren't mutually exclusive, that this company promotes based on merit rather than office politics. His gaze swept the room, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. Or are you suggesting that I should choose between the woman I love and the company I built? Because I can tell you right now which one I'll choose, and it's not the one that can be replaced by shareholders and quarterly reports. The raw honesty in his declaration sent murmurs rippling through the room. Richard Walker, the man who lived and breathed corporate success, had just announced his priorities in terms that left no room for interpretation. "Richard," Bartholomew said carefully, "you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Richard moved to stand beside Camilla, his hand finding hers with unconscious certainty. "This woman has been my partner in ways I didn't even understand until today. She's made me a better leader, a better strategist, and a better man. If this board can't see her value, then you don't deserve either of us." Camilla felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. This wasn't the time for sentiment. This was the moment that would define both their futures. "I need to ask you something," Bartholomew said, his attention focused on Camilla. "If we agree to this promotion, if we give you the recognition and compensation you're requesting, what guarantee do we have that your relationship with Richard won't compromise your judgment? The same guarantee you have that any other executive's personal life won't affect their professional performance," Camilla replied without hesitation. "My word, my track record, and my commitment to this company's success. And if your relationship ends, if this romance turns acrimonious, then we'll handle it like the adults we are," Richard said firmly. "But that's a risk every company takes when they employ human beings instead of robots." Bartholomew was quiet for another long moment, his gaze moving between the united front presented by Richard and Camilla. Finally, he looked around the table at his fellow board members. "All in favor of promoting Miss Brown to Senior Strategic Advisor, with a salary adjustment to reflect her actual contributions, and establishing a clear policy regarding inter-office relationships." The vote was closer than Camilla had hoped. 7 in favor, 5 opposed. But it was enough. Motion carried. Bartholomew's smile was small, but genuine. "Miss Brown, welcome to the executive level. I have a feeling you're going to shake things up around here." As the board members filed out of the conference room, their expressions ranging from resigned to intrigued, Camilla found herself alone with Richard for the first time since the ordeal began. "So," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "Senior Strategic Advisor Camilla Brown. It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" "It does." He moved closer, his hands settling on her waist with familiar warmth. "Though I have to admit, I'm going to miss having you right outside my office." "Who says I'm going anywhere? The 43rd floor is only 1 flight up." "True." His smile was soft, intimate, meant only for her. "And I suppose this means I can finally ask you out properly without worrying about professional boundaries." "Are you asking?" "Camilla Brown, will you have dinner with me tonight, somewhere public where we don't have to hide, where I can look at you like I'm completely in love with you, without worrying about who might see?" The question made her heart flutter with possibilities. "Yes, Richard Walker. I thought you'd never ask," as he leaned down to kiss her, right there in the boardroom where she had just claimed her place among the most powerful executives in the city. Camilla realized that sometimes the biggest risks led to the most beautiful rewards, and sometimes love really was worth fighting for. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Camilla's corner office on the 43rd floor, painting golden rectangles across her mahogany desk. The nameplate read, "Camilla Brown, Senior Strategic Advisor," in elegant script, and every time she saw it she felt a quiet thrill of satisfaction, not because of the title itself, but because of what it represented. Recognition earned, battles fought, and a future built on her own terms. A soft knock interrupted her review of the Johannesburg Mining Partnership proposal, the same partnership she had successfully negotiated in flawless Afrikaans, just as she'd promised the board 6 months ago. "Come in." The door opened to reveal Marcus, looking professional in his navy suit and carrying a tablet, loaded with his latest internship project. Her brother had not only excelled in the program, but had already received offers from 3 different departments for a full-time position after graduation. "Good morning, Senior Strategic Advisor Brown," he said with a grin that reminded her of their father. "Good morning, Intern Brown. Please tell me you have good news about the Morrison expansion analysis." Better than good. The projections show we can increase market penetration by 42% if we implement your recommended strategy. He set the tablet on her desk, his expression shifting to something more serious. Cam, I need to say something. She looked up from the numbers, noting the earnestness in his voice. What is it? I'm proud of you. Not just for the promotion or the success, but for having the courage to go after what you wanted. His smile was soft, genuine. Mom and Dad would be proud too. Emotion tightened her throat, but she managed to keep her voice steady. Thank you, that means everything to me. Plus, Richard's not nearly as scary as you used to make him sound. He actually laughed at one of my jokes yesterday. Richard Walker laughed at your joke? Camilla feigned shock. Should I be worried about his mental state? Very funny. Marcus gathered his tablet, heading toward the door. By the way, he's looking for you. Something about lunch plans. As if summoned by their conversation, Richard appeared in her doorway. 6 months had softened some of his harder edges. He smiled more easily now, laughed more often, and had developed the habit of bringing her coffee every morning, despite her protests that she could get her own. Marcus, Richard nodded to her brother with genuine warmth. Excellent work on the Morrison analysis. I'll be recommending you for the Shanghai project team when you graduate. Marcus's eyes widened. Seriously, thank you, Mr. Walker. I won't let you down. I know you won't. You're a Brown. Letting people down doesn't seem to be in your DNA. After Marcus left, practically bouncing with excitement, Richard closed the office door and moved to perch on the edge of Camilla's desk. The casual intimacy of the gesture still made her pulse quicken, even after months of stolen moments and public declarations of their relationship. Busy morning? He asked, glancing at the papers scattered across her workspace. The best kind. She leaned back in her chair, taking a moment to simply look at him. Richard in love was a revelation. More relaxed, more open, more willing to show vulnerability. The Johannesburg deal is officially signed. The Morrison expansion is ahead of schedule, and your CFO just informed me that our Q2 profits exceeded projections by 18%. Our profits, Richard corrected with a smile that made her heart flutter. I seem to recall you having something to do with those numbers. I might have contributed a small insight or two. He laughed, reaching out to tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. The simple touch sent warmth spiraling through her body, as it always did. Speaking of insights, he said, his voice dropping to the intimate tone that never failed to make her breath catch. I have a proposition for you. I'm listening. Lunch. The little cafe where we had our first real conversation outside the office. I have something important to discuss with you. About work? Not about work. His smile held secrets that made her pulse race. About us. An hour later, they sat at the same corner table where Richard had first asked about her life outside Walker Enterprises, where he had first begun to see her as more than just his efficient assistant. The cafe was busy with the lunch crowd, but they existed in their own private bubble, hands intertwined across the small table. Do you remember what you told me that first day we came here? Richard asked, his thumb tracing circles against her palm. I told you many things. You'll have to be more specific. You said that you thought about possibility, about the difference between what people show the world and who they really are underneath. I remember. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about possibility, about who we really are when all the pretenses are stripped away. He lifted their joined hands, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. And I've realized something. What's that? I spent 37 years building a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt empty when I was alone with myself. I thought that was just the price of ambition, that love and happiness were luxuries I couldn't afford if I wanted to build something lasting. His grey eyes met hers, full of a tenderness that still had the power to take her breath away. But you showed me that I had it backwards, that love doesn't make you weak or distracted. It makes you stronger, more focused, more willing to fight for what matters. He paused, his voice growing softer. You make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. Richard, I love your mind, Camilla. I love your strength, your integrity, your refusal to settle for less than you deserve. I love the way you challenge me, the way you make me laugh, the way you see solutions where everyone else sees problems. His smile was radiant with emotion. But most of all, I love the woman you are when you think no one is watching. Kind, generous, brilliant, and more beautiful than you have any right to be. He released her hand, reaching into his jacket pocket to withdraw a small velvet box that made her heart stop completely. Camilla Brown, you've been my partner in every way that matters for longer than either of us realized. You've made me a better leader, a better man, and shown me what it means to build a life worth living. He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the cafe's soft lighting like captured starlight. "Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with all the love and possibility they had fought so hard to protect. Around them, the cafe continued its bustling rhythm, but Camilla felt as if time had stopped entirely. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, of course, yes." As Richard slipped the ring onto her finger, with hands that trembled slightly, Camilla realized that sometimes the most beautiful transformations weren't the dramatic ones that everyone could see. Sometimes they were the quiet ones that happened in stolen moments and whispered conversations, in the space between who you were and who you were brave enough to become. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone who loved every version of yourself, the professional strategist, the vulnerable woman, the dreamer who still believed in possibility. As Richard leaned across the table to seal their engagement with a kiss that tasted like forever, Camilla knew that the best part of their story wasn't the ending. It was everything that came after it. Would you have made the same choice Camilla did, fighting for love despite the professional risks? What did this story teach you about the courage it takes to demand the recognition you deserve? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.